Welcome to Storytimer at Large. Bridgett Allen, Sherry Wilson, and Anne. He had forgotten to tie her up this time. Anne, as we'll call her, had been repeatedly raped since he and the other man had abducted her. They would tie her up tightly to the tree afterward. But that morning, after raping her, he had fallen asleep. His gun was right there. She could try to run away, but what if he woke up and caught up to her? What if the other man came back and the two of them tracked her down? They had already killed two of her friends. She knew that. No, she couldn't risk running away with them around. She quietly and slowly got up and reached for the sawed-off shotgun. This sounds like a work of fiction, but it was the reality of one 15-year-old girl in Kentucky in April of 1990. She did manage to reach the gun and eliminate one of the men, Philip E. Clopton, who had abducted and repeatedly assaulted her for 3 weeks in a remote wooded area. She then hiked out of the woods and reached a road around 12:30 p.m. She didn't know where she was exactly or which direction to go. She guessed. She followed the road and reached a small town with some shops. She walked into a store there, Howardstown Liquors, and asked the stunned store clerk to please call the police. The date was Thursday, April 26, 1990. The brave young girl is not named in newspaper reports to protect her as she recovered from such a traumatic incident. Police responded quickly. The teen girl, who we will call Anne, was transported and received medical care at Hardin Memorial Hospital in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. She later described the location of the campsite. Police were able to find the campsite and Philip E. Clopton's body. A guard dog was also lurking around the campsite, which was a half a mile in the woods off a gravel road on land once owned by Clopton's grandparents. The guard dog threatened the police and the EMS who were on the scene to try to render aid in case Clopton had somehow survived the gunshot wound. Police were forced to kill the dog in order to access Clopton's body in the tent. Anne was reunited with her family, who were grateful and relieved that she was alive. She told investigators all she knew and all she had experienced. A diary, kept by Clopton at the campsite and recovered by police, described the two men's activities in the weeks and months prior. In late January 1990, two 14-year-old girls, Bridgett Allen and Sherry Wilson. This is photos of them. On the left is Bridgett Allen with the lighter colored hair, and Sherry Wilson is on the right with the dark colored hair. The two girls, Bridgett and Sherry, had come to Clopton's apartment, needing a place to stay, according to Clopton's diary. They thought of Clopton like an uncle after meeting him in a grocery store in Louisville in 1987. This is all according to Clopton. Clopton wrote that the two teens had run away from home. He and James Ray Cable then raped, sodomized, killed, and dismembered the two girls. Clopton and Cable stored their body parts in footlockers and then drove around rural Kentucky, scattering their remains over 3 rural counties. On March 2, 1990, a man hauling gravel out of Pottinger's Creek found a decaying human arm near the towns of New Haven and Gethsemane in Nelson County, Kentucky. A canine team consisting of Trooper Davidson and a dog named Bingo searched that area for additional remains, but they were unable to locate any. After Anne emerged from the woods in late April, Kentucky State Troopers searched again for additional remains. Canine Bingo and his handler, Trooper Davidson, again searched extensively, but nothing was found. January through May would be lean times for carnivorous wildlife. Coyotes, foxes, weasels, and other wildlife probably carried away anything and everything. With bones being then scattered across a very wide area, the searches were not surprisingly unsuccessful. The arm that was found in early March would have to be matched through fingerprints taken from each of the girls' bedrooms in order to determine whether the arm belonged to Bridgett Allen or to Sherry Wilson. What a terrible thing that must have been. Those two families had to go through the loss of their daughters, and then just the grief must have been so raw as they walked, or as they waited there to find out who that arm actually belonged to. It turned out to be Bridgett Allen's arm. She's the young lady on the left side. The surviving rapist, James Ray Cable, claimed that he had nothing to do with this and that he was being framed. Both Philip E. Clopton and James Ray Cable had extensive criminal backgrounds. Philip Eanes Clopton, he's the man who was shot by the young woman that he had abducted, Anne. He was shot and killed. Philip Eanes Clopton was 39 when he was killed. He was born in 1951 to Alberta Eanes Clopton and Creed Clopton. He spent time in the military after high school and served in Vietnam. He was discharged at the Army's lowest rank. He had been a staff sergeant, but he was bumped down because of a 1979 conviction of abducting, raping, and sodomizing two different women in two different incidents. One of the women had been abducted and kept for 3 days in a remote cabin. Two accomplices were also there, and both also assaulted the woman. After 3 days, they dropped her off at a bus station in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. She went straight to the police. In those same months, Clopton continued to commit more heinous acts. Philip Eanes Clopton was still in the military in 1979 and stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He was a staff sergeant at the time and abducted a 19-year-old private at gunpoint. He took her to his trailer and raped her. He was arrested and convicted of both abductions and assaults. He lost his staff sergeant rank due to his criminal convictions. You would think that 2 violent abductions and rapes would have meant a long sentence in prison. However, he was sentenced to 15 and 12 years for each of the offenses, and he was paroled inexplicably in 1983. So these crimes were committed in 1979. He's sentenced to 12 and 15 years and is paroled in only 2 years, basically, in 1983. By the time the trials were over with, it would have been practically 1980, so 3 years. James Ray Cable, 41, also had an extensive criminal history. He was born in 1949 in LaGrange County, Indiana. That's north of Fort Wayne in Indiana's northeast corner. He was convicted in 1971 of raping a 7-year-old girl in Owensboro, Kentucky. He pled guilty in that trial. He spoke to court-appointed psychiatrists and admitted then to raping 6 women from 1969 through 1971. He was sentenced to life in prison. While in prison at Eddyville, Kentucky, he used a horseshoe stake to strike and kill a fellow inmate. He was given an additional 10 years for that murder, which was prosecuted as a manslaughter charge. Life plus 10 years, so he should have never gotten out. Did he escape? No. Kentucky officials thought he was doing fine and paroled him in 1981. He committed another violent rape and was back in prison again in 1983. 3 strikes and you're out? No. He was again paroled in 1986. So he was free then to rape and kill alongside Philip E. Clopton in 1990. If only rape had been considered a violent and serious crime, so many other rapes and murders would have been prevented. James Ray Cable and his girlfriend claimed during this April 1990 incident, they claimed that he was completely innocent. He worked as a pizza delivery driver in Louisville's historic district. His girlfriend said he had been with her around the clock and couldn't possibly have done any of these recent rapes and murders with Clopton. However, Anne, the young girl who escaped so bravely, Anne's testimony disputed that claim. James Ray Cable was convicted and sentenced to life plus 300 years without the possibility of parole for the abductions, rapes, and murders that he committed with Philip Eanes Clopton. The two murdered 14-year-old girls, Bridgett Allen and Sherry Wilson, and Anne, saw some justice done, at least. It's a tragedy that the earlier rapes and abductions were not seen as serious crimes. Both men received fairly long sentences earlier, but were paroled, even though most people with any common sense could see the danger here. That left the public in grave danger. But remember, only men made those laws in those days, and most of them have no idea what a rape is like. It's not something that the men making those laws were worried about. They didn't have to worry about being a victim of rape for the most part. It might have entered their minds, however, that they might one day be accused of rape. Did they set sentencing guidelines with their own potential freedom in mind? Maybe. Did they look, when they were serving on parole boards, did the men look at these other men who had been convicted of rape and have more sympathy for them than they did for their victims? What about that inmate that was murdered? Did they just see him as disposable? That's why manslaughter was the charge? Hard to say. Bridgett Allen was born in 1976. She and her mother had always been very close. Lately, though, she said, Bridgett had been spending more time away with her friends. She was a pretty typical teen. She experimented with drugs and alcohol like a lot of teens do. She skipped school like a lot of teens do. But she never did anything too outrageous. Her mother could not imagine why she would run away. I'm not sure that she did. Remember, we only have Clopton's word for that. And he's a rapist and murderer, so he's going to write whatever he wants to write in his diary. Sherry Wilson was born in 1976. Her father was a drill sergeant at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The family had a strict but loving conservative atmosphere. Sherry's father was surprised that Sherry and Bridgett supposedly ran away. He said that he and Sherry had their issues, but he didn't think that the girls would run away. And again, I don't think they did. It appears that they might not have run away, but they did know Clopton. They were at his apartment on January 20th, 1990, according to Bridgett Allen's diary. It seems that they were befriended, lured, and groomed by Clopton for years. They had visited him before, and he had provided them with drugs and alcohol in the past. Police believe that the two girls were killed probably the next day on January 21st when they returned to his apartment. James Ray Cable died in 2013. At the time of his death, he was awaiting trial for the 1986 murder of Sandra Kellums of Owensboro. James Ray Cable was also being investigated for another 1989 Owensboro murder. Had police been on to him in Owensboro in 1989? Was that why he moved to Louisville? I wonder what else he did. How many other victims are out there? People were outraged after this at the lenient sentences and paroles that let these two dangerous men out over and over. And things began to change in Kentucky after this. People began debating the sentences and the parole guidelines for sex offenders. This was years still before the sex offender registry came about. Cases like this one and the public outrage that these later abductions, assaults, and murders were entirely preventable brought about that change. Rape began to be viewed as a violent crime that deserved serious sentencing. I want to take a moment to send out a wish for peace, healing, and success for Anne. She was 15 when she was abducted. She suffered severe trauma. Her only way out was to kill her kidnapper. She bravely did that. I hope she's doing really well today. She likely saved not just her own life, but the lives of many other girls. I don't think these men were going to stop killing. Kentucky should have given her a medal. I also want to take a moment to send a wish for peace and healing to all the victims. And I want to honor the memories of Bridgett, Allen, and Sherry Wilson. They should still be here. They had their entire lives ahead of them, and all of that was taken. Rest in peace, Bridgett Allen and Sherry Wilson.